Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're excited to welcome participants from around the globe for today's webinar on the second edition of the Market Monitoring, Analysis, and Response Kit, also known as MARKit. The MARKit team from Catholic Relief Services and colleagues from International Rescue Committee will be sharing insights and experiences on the toolkit and practical applications for analysis and decision-making today. This webinar is part of the rollout of the updated MARKit toolkit, which was partially funded by an IDEAL grant. My name is Sonia Parakis, and I am the Senior Markets and Trade Advisor for the Famine Early Warning System Network, and will be facilitating today's presentations and Q&A session. We're excited for your participation and ask that you please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, organization, title, and a brief description of your experience with the MARKit toolkit. Today's webinar is 1 hour and 15 minutes, and we hope you can stay connected with us past the hour for the Q&A session. We will be holding all questions until after the presentation sessions, and ask that you please type any questions you might have for the presenters into the chat. If you require IT support, please contact Aaron Jordan, and his email will be in the chat. Should you get disconnected for some reason, we recommend returning to your Outlook or Google invitation and clicking on the meeting link to rejoin. Now, before turning to our presenters for the day, I'm delighted to introduce Ruco van der Merwe, for the Food Security and Markets Advisor for the U.S. Agency for International Development's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, to share a few opening remarks. Ruco, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And just as Sonia also noted, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's presentation on the MARKit version 2 toolkit, and specifically kind of looking at the practical ways in which the tool can facilitate programmatic decision making. I'll provide some brief introductory remarks, at which point I'll pass it over to some of our colleagues who will look more at kind of in depth at how the tool has been used and some case studies. I feel really honored to be able to introduce this webinar today, partially because I personally find it extremely useful, but also because market monitoring is really considered a cornerstone of USAID BHA's resource transfer programs. Ever since its first iteration of the tool, USAID has been very supportive of it and really considers it to be one of the best documents for guidance related to market monitoring and decision making. This value that we attach to it is not merely lip service, but it's also reflected as a recommended tool in the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance emergency application guidelines. We truly believe that it's not just kind of a tick the box donor requirement, but rather an invaluable activity which helps us to ensure our humanitarian assistance remains appropriate and able to adequately cover humanitarian needs. So just a couple of overarching comments from my side. First off, I really appreciate that CRS and its partners undertook the revision of the tool and were really responsive to a lot of the lessons learned from that first iteration. It has really made it more accessible, and you don't need to be an economist to actually use it effectively, which is great. Second, the purpose of monitoring is really to be able to be responsive to the context in which we operate. It's not just collecting information for information's sake, but really being able to take that information and help to transition it to more adaptive management, so where that data actually influences what we do. So often, I think we frequently look at kind of our monitoring that we need to monitor in case we need to completely shift modalities based on changes. But really, the beauty of MARKit is that it highlights so many of those minute programmatic changes and operational adjustments we can make within the same modality that will help to address some of the market monitoring concerns that we see. Third is really that it's an evidence-based approach, using data to make informed decisions that are not wed to kind of principled positions on a specific modality. And that really kind of aligns well with BHA's modality neutral approach in terms of how we look at resource transfers. In the current environment that we're working in, and especially kind of reflecting on COVID, it really has highlighted the importance of being able to keep a finger on the market pulse but more importantly, to be able to be responsive to those changes that we see. And that's exactly what today's session and the MARKit tool is about. So with that being said, I'm super excited about the presentation, and Sonia, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Ruko, for those remarks and words of encouragement. Now turning to our presenters for the day. Kusum Watra is a technical advisor for food security and markets at CRS. Since the first edition of MARKit was published in 2015, Kusum has been working to roll out the tool. He is a certified MARKit trainer of trainers from the English TOT that was held in October and November of 2020. Megan McGlinchey is a senior technical advisor for local markets on the CRS Global Supply Chain team. With almost 20 years of experience working with food security and markets in humanitarian and development contexts, she has been involved with MARKit since its inception. Emily Sloan is a cash and markets technical advisor within IRC's Economic Recovery and Development Technical Unit. She splits her time between providing direct support to IRC's programs in the Great Lakes region of Africa and supporting IRC's global initiatives to develop and promote good practice in market analysis and market-based programming. Yannick Benson is a regional cash specialist with IRC's Economic Recovery and Development Technical Unit, providing cash and voucher-related technical assistance to 16 countries in East and West Africa. He is based in Cameroon. Yannick is also a certified MARKit trainer, like Kusum. Marie-Sophie Hu is a food security and livelihoods program manager in Nigeria with CRS. She is a field implementer with a focus on CVA in areas affected by conflict and natural disaster. Currently, she is managing a multi-sectorial program in Northeast Nigeria. Kusum and Megan will provide an overview of MARKit, with Megan walking us through a sample analysis so you can see what kinds of analyses are done. Then we'll hear from Emily, Yannick, and Marie-Sophie, who will give some very practical examples of how they use MARKit in their programs in the field. We'll conclude today's webinar with a discussion and Q&A session. As a reminder for participants, we ask that you please keep yourselves on mute and please keep your video off while the presenters are speaking. We also ask that you please remember to hold your questions we'll ask that you please hold your questions until after the presentation sessions and ask that you please type your questions that you might have for the presenters into the chat as they come up. And now, our first two presenters on the MARKit overview and sample analysis, Kusum and Megan, over to you. Kusum, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Sorry, Sonia, and thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. Before we start, I would like to mention that this webinar follows two previous webinars. The first one held in May 2020 during the Global Food Security Cluster meeting, and the second one during the Grand Bargain Cash Workstream meeting. So those two webinars were a sort of overview of MARKit, while this one really focused on the practical application of MARKit. To start, let me remind few key dates. The MARKit project was launched in 2008 by CRS, CARE, and LRP Learning Alliance. LRP, a local and regional purchase. Okay, and the project was funded by USAID TOPS. The manual, in fact, was published in August 2015, and after a few years, we realized that there was a very low use of MARKit, so we launched the MARKit mentorship program to not only support our country programs, help build the capacity in market monitoring, but also learned through the process so that to inform the revision of MARKit. So the second edition, as you are probably aware, was published in January 2020. To start, let us ask us why it is important. Of course, understanding whether altering the intervention strategy is necessary and in which form. In some cases, market monitoring can be important to help improve future program design through lessons learned. Next slide, please. Why MARKit? What is MARKit? MARKit is a project-level market monitoring framework to guide users to determine the causes of abnormal price changes and make program adjustments as necessary. At the beginning, the main objective were to establish an harmonized approach to market monitoring, and I'm sure this is still relevant, support evidence-based decision-making and project design, ensure programs remain responsive to changing market conditions, mitigate unintended impact on market system, so to respect the principle of do no harm, determine appropriate transfer value to meet identified needs, promote learning and good practices in food assistance and other resource transfer programs. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, we implemented the MARKit mentorship program in 2016 through 2018. And what we learned is that MARKit is really needed. It's useful, technical, solid, but there were some challenges. Many people found it too complicated, too long, too many markets to monitor. No one reads the whole thing. Very few people use the worksheets. Secondary and historical data were rarely used, even in countries where this data was available. And we also learned that it was important to put more emphasis on proper setup of the market monitoring platform and a clear, simple database was needed for easier data entry and analysis. And we also learned that MARKit is used for more than food assistance programs. Next slide, please. So now let me give you an overview of the current manual. Okay, in the previous manual, we had, if you remember, 6 steps. Now we have grouped them in 4 phases and a total of 9 steps. The first phase, which is what we call initial phase, it is important. It's focused on the need to have a good understanding of the market context. So if you have a market baseline, that is fine. So that means you have, a reference market information. But if you do not have, it is important, this is a moment to conduct a market assessment. And also to conduct a response analysis. In general, it is recommended to conduct a response analysis so that you choose your resource transfer modality. In any case, this modality will be important for setting up your market monitoring system. Also, during the initial phase, it is important to have the buy-in of your leadership. This was one of the key lessons we learned. One of the barriers to market, to using MARKit is the lack of leadership buy-in. So it is important to foster the leadership buy-in and to ensure flexibility in your program design, so that if you need at a time to change your to make some adjustment to your program strategy, so that you can do it. Okay? So you may need in this phase also to budget for market monitoring so that when you undertake your market monitoring, budget is not the issue or the barrier. So the phase A, which is a prepare phase, this one is very important. That was one lesson learned from the mentorship program to emphasize the preparation phase and not just jumping into data collection and analysis. So in this part of the manual, it is important to clarify your market assessment objective and to communicate them to all stakeholders, including your partners. This is when you select your commodities to monitor, you select your market to monitor, and you identify your secondary data sources and eventual contacts. This is when you form your market monitoring team, you identify your context risk factors, you determine the threshold, we will later talk about this, threshold, which threshold, when you exceed, they show a flag to you, they flag you that something wrong is happening in the market. And this is also when you set up your database and you prepare your data collection tools. Okay. Now, the phase B is about data collection and data entry. During this phase, really this is when you go in the field, in the market, you collect price data, and you come back and enter the data. And eventually, if you are using electronic data collection system, and you transfer, you connect to your database. But what I would like to emphasize here is the importance to review the data that is being collected, both in the field and when you come back from the field in the office. And also when entering data, you need to make sure you review data that is entered to make to ensure the quality of your data. Phase C is about the analysis, and the next slide will talk about the analysis. Phase D is about reporting and the eventual adaptations to your market, to your program, if necessary. Let's move to the next slide, please. Now, I will first talk about the analysis. In the current version, the second edition of MARKit, we have worked to clarify the different analysis that need to be done, and in a very simple manner, so that everybody, even if you are not a data analyst, you can play with that and you can do your analysis. So there are 5 types of analysis. One being focusing on, one being relevant for only voucher programs. So the analysis one is in your database to format your database so that to highlight price changes that exceed a chosen percentage level. What does it mean? So during the prepare phase, you configure your database and you define some threshold, and whenever you collect price data, you just enter the raw data, and the data that exceed your threshold will flag in a particular color that you have determined. The second analysis is to compare the price change against how price should change in a given season. So in the prepare phase, it is recommended, if you have historical data, to graph what we call seasonal index. And if you don't have historical data, you can use qualitative information to establish a seasonal calendar. And anytime you compare, you collect data, you can compare with how price will normally change in the season. Megan, my colleague Megan, will take you through the different analysis and show you how it works practically. So I will not go into details. Analysis 3 is to compare the current monthly prices of a commodity to its monthly price during the last 3 to 5 years. So this also requires that you get historical data for at least the 3 previous years so that you can compare your price trends with how they should, with the trends for the average 5 years or the average last 3 years or 4 years. Analysis 4 is really to compare monthly commodity prices in each intervention market with those in the regional source market so that you can see how price in your intervention market, for example, is leading compared to the regional source market. And as I mentioned at the beginning, analysis 5 is more relevant for voucher program, and it consists of comparing monthly prices between participating and non-participating vendors. And this can also be relevant for local or regional producers when you have some vendors participating in your program and comparing with those who are not participating in your program. Now, we need to ask ourselves, when you do these 4 analysis or 5 analysis, if further analysis is needed. And for this, we just ask us some questions, and the MARKit guide you, MARKit provide you the questions that you should ask yourself and how this guide you to make a decision. Click, please. Okay. So the first question is how price change beyond the threshold that you have established. If yes, and then you use what we call the price characterization matrix to identify the factors that are likely to be the cause of your price variation. And if the answer to the question is no, click please. If the answer to the question is no, and then you ask yourself if price should have normally changed compared to the seasonal trends, okay? And if yes, again, you go to your price characterization matrix and see what are the factors that are likely to be cause of your price variation. But if the answer to the second question is no, and then you stop there, no further analysis is needed. Next slide, please. Now, let's talk about the price characterization matrix. This is the matrix I was referring to. So I will not present all the matrix, but I will just take one particular example to show how you can use this matrix to decide on the likely or on the factors that are likely to cause price variation. So let's consider, for example, that you are intervening in a particular region, and through your market monitoring, you realize that price has changed beyond the threshold for only one commodity and in one market. Okay. In that case, factors that you can consider which can cause, your price variation can be seasonality. It can also be local supply shocks. It can be local demand shocks. It can be the trader capacity, the trader ability to get together to set up high price for this commodity. And it can also be your intervention. But again, MARKit says intervention is only one factor that can explain your price variation. So you need to consider all those factors that are in the green, in the blue color. Okay. So I will not present all the charts. Megan will come to this again. So let's move to the next slide. So again, you have here the list of the 10 potential factors that can explain your price variation. So one thing to mention is that sometimes it can be one factor that explains your price variation, but it can also be the combination of several factors. And so step 7, really step 7 of the manual take you through all those factors and explain how you can conduct further analysis to determine the factors that can explain your price variation. Next slide, please. So here we will not really go through the 10 factors, but we'll take only one example to show you how it is presented in the manual and how the manual help you to do your further analysis. So here is the example of supply shocks. So you can see there is a short definition of supply shock, and also in the manual you will see we've clearly explained what this factor is, why this factor is important, how it can influence, it can cause price variation, and more importantly, the type of analysis that is needed. And if you look at the table in your left side, you have the type of analysis, and for some factors, you have the type of analysis recommended for quantitative data, but also for qualitative information. And if quantitative, the right column show you the type of data that is needed, or the type of qualitative method you can use to collect your qualitative information. Next slide, please. So after having conducted your analysis and investigate the causes of your price variation, and you need now to see if you need to make any adjustment to your program. Okay, so there are some questions, there are some factors that can help you determine if adjustment is needed to the program. There are the severity and duration of the price change, the impact of the price change on beneficiaries and your non-beneficiaries, the risk that continuing the intervention will further exacerbate the price change, and what other organizations in the same area are doing or planning to do. Okay. So there are several levels of adjustment. In most cases, you will need just some minor adjustments, but in other cases, you will need no adjustment to the current program, particularly if the price variation is one-off variation or is not at a high level. But in some cases also you can need drastic adjustments. But for drastic adjustment, you probably need to inform your donor and get the approval before you can do that. So this is what I wanted to present. Next slide, please. This is what I wanted to present, but my colleague Megan will take you to practical application of MARKit, particularly the analysis part. So my pleasure to hand over to my colleague Megan. Megan, please. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kassim. And Kassim, please unmute. Great. Thanks. And again, my name is Megan McGlinchey, and I'm the Senior Advisor for Local Markets on CRS's Global Supply Chain team. I'll provide a brief look at the MARKit template database. This database is intended to facilitate the 5 analyses outlined in the MARKit manual and which Kassim just reviewed in his presentation. The need for a template database came out strongly in the consultations that led to the development and release of the 2nd edition of MARKit. A few caveats before we start. The database is currently under development, so this demonstration is just a sneak preview of what we are working on and may change as we finalize the product. I'll show you the database as it currently exists in Excel, but it's our plan to make the template available in Power BI. Power BI offers more powerful analytics and a more user-friendly dashboard compared to Excel. We're still happy to share the Excel version with those who want it, but we plan to focus the development of supporting materials on Power BI. This sample database was populated with prices from the FuseNet database for Mali. So it's real data with maybe a small tweak here or there to better illustrate a point. But you'll see that we've anonymized the names of markets and the currency while we work on and present the template database. And the last caveat I'll give is that I will go through the database rather quickly. We'll have some time for questions and answers after the lineup of presentations. However, we won't have time to go into technical issues on the database. As we further refine it, and if there's interest, we can look into setting up a separate webinar to discuss the database in more detail. And with that, let's open up the database and take a look. Okay, can you see the database?
Yes.
Great. I'll start by drawing your attention to the workbook tabs at the bottom of the screen. The reference and historical data tabs, highlighted in orange, are configured during database setup and shouldn't require subsequent input unless changes are made to your monitoring system. I'm not going to show these tabs, but I will note that historical data is not required for MARKit, although some of the analyses in this database won't work without it. The MARKit manual offers alternative qualitative analysis methods where historical data is not available. Data is entered into the New Data tab indicated in green with each new cycle of data collection. Each row in this worksheet represents the price of one commodity in one market from one source, which may be either primary or secondary data. The data fields in this tab are the same as in the historical data tab, with an additional column to distinguish between participating and non-participating vendors in your voucher program, if relevant. Data may be entered manually into this worksheet or fed directly from a digital data collection platform, such as ComCare. The tabs highlighted in blue correspond to the different analyses recommended in the MARKit methodology. For each analysis, the price data are pulled from either the historical or current data tabs using pivot tables and then reconfigured into the tables and graphs that I'll show you. All of these tabs are automated, so the only thing you'll do on these tabs is to use the filters to toggle between commodities and markets and dates. So analysis 1 shows price changes for each commodity across the different markets. The commodity is selected using the filter and the markets are shown in the different columns. In this analysis, we're looking for price changes that exceed a preset threshold. And I've set the threshold at 10%, but this is determined during the setup phase, depending on normal price fluctuations in your market. We're interested in looking at the most recent prices. So this is the percent change in price from August to September 2018. We see here that the price of rice increased beyond the threshold by nearly 12% in the cheetah market. There are no price changes beyond the threshold values for cowpeas or in the other markets. So that's it for analysis 1. We've noted the increase in price for rice and cheetah, and we're going to put that in our pocket for a few minutes as we go through the other analyses. And I'll just mention here that we're only flagging potential concerns through these 5 analyses. We're not saying at this point that this particular price change we've noted is problematic for markets or for our programming. Analysis 2 compares the most recent price changes against how we expect prices to change in this period based on seasonality. So analysis 1 tells us when prices do change beyond a set threshold, but it doesn't tell us if a price didn't change but should have. And we've added this analysis in the MARKit second edition. This is something that we missed in the original version. Since we have historical data in our example, we can calculate the seasonal index for each commodity in each market, which is represented numerically at the top of the screen and graphically below. So how do we do this analysis? For each of the commodities, we look at the seasonal reference to understand how prices typically change for the period of analysis. And in our example, this is from August to September. In the Simba market here, for example, we see that the price of maize is relatively stable between August and September. So we don't expect any major changes. However, if we look at the Pantera market, we do expect to see a drop in prices between August and September for maize, presumably following the start of the harvest. So now that we understand how prices should move, we want to go back to our price analysis table, our price change table in analysis 1, and see if these patterns played out in the current period. And as expected, the price of maize in Cheetah is relatively stable, but I want to draw your attention again to Pantera. So from our seasonal calendar, our seasonal index, we're actually expecting this price to decrease, but rather we see an increase in price by nearly 9%. So this is something that we might want to flag, and we'll come back to this. Now, again, if you don't have historical data, then we can't generate these seasonal indexes and do this analysis quantitatively. And in this case, you can refer to a qualitative seasonal calendar. And I've copied a generic table here in another tab just as illustration. The analysis is very similar to what we just went through. So you'll look at your period of analysis to determine what is the expected price pattern. Then you'll return to your current price changes to make any comparisons. As Kasum mentioned, in the MARKit second edition, we really focus on developing your seasonal references, be they quantitative indices or qualitative calendars, during the preparation phase, so they're readily available come analysis time. Okay, moving to analysis 3. This compares current monthly prices to historical averages. And this analysis requires that we have historical data. And what we want to do in this analysis is to make sure that incremental price changes over multiple periods do not result in a significant divergence from normal patterns. So as you can see here, for maize in the Cheetah market, prices have increased at rates just below the 10% threshold value in each of the last 3 months. So taken individually, these price changes might fly under our radar, but the cumulative effect is a significantly higher price in September compared to historical trends. So again, we'll want to note this commodity market combination as something that we may want to look into. Analysis 4 compares prices and markets that we know to be well integrated, meaning we expect prices in these markets to move in similar patterns. So where analysis 3 looks at prices temporally across time, analysis 4 looks at prices spatially across markets. So this analysis can be useful in cases where we do not have historical data. But we do need to understand how prices in different markets relate to one another, so we know if something is amiss. I'm sure no one has noticed this, but I slipped in a screenshot from another data set since the Molly data we've been using doesn't show strong integration across markets and thus doesn't illustrate well what this analysis can show. But if we look at the price data here, we see that prices move in very similar patterns across the different markets. So if we're doing our analysis in one of the periods indicated here, we might think that something is going on in this market and may want to investigate this further because we see this divergence from the normal expected patterns. And finally, for analysis 5, we compare prices between participating and non-participating vendors in our voucher programs. And for this analysis, we look at the different commodities in each market for the specific period of our analysis. And in our example, we see here that voucher vendors in Cheetah, on average, report higher prices for maize and rice compared to non-participating vendors. So this is something that we may want to investigate. And if we click through the other markets, we see there's no appreciable differences in prices between the two sets of vendors. And so that is our quick run through of the analyses in the database. And Dina, I'll ask you to return to the PowerPoint and go to the next slide. Great. So how do we pull this information together and decide on next steps? We can now go back to the decision tree, which Kasum presented earlier, and ask ourselves, have prices changed beyond their threshold for the current period, which is analysis 1, or over the course of the project, analysis 3. And what we've just observed is that, yes, the price of rice exceeded the threshold this month in the Cheetah market, and the price of maize has also been increasing for several months in the same market. Rice and maize in Cheetah market are also where we see higher prices for participating vendors relative to non-participating vendors. So this could be driving some of this price change. Moving down in the analysis tree, we also noted a price change that should have happened but didn't, which again is analysis 2. And this happened in the Pantera market for maize. So our next step now is to look at the price matrix to characterize these price changes. So based on our observed price changes, I would characterize these in the blue quadrant, which represents price changes affecting one or few commodities, rice and maize, and in one or few markets, Cheetah and Pantera. And as Kasum mentioned, we can use the hints in this quadrant to focus our investigations into what might be causing the price changes that we've observed and what implications, if any, they have on our program. And that is where I'm going to leave it. So thank you for listening. And now back to Sonia.
Thank you so much, Kasum and Megan. We'll now turn to our next presenters on practical applications of MARKit for analysis and decision-making. Emily, Yannick, and Marie-Sophie, over to you.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm Emily Sloan from IRC. Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak very briefly about our efforts at IRC to mainstream market monitoring and also the role that MARKit is playing in that effort. Just going to wait for the slides to pop back up. Okay, great. So next slide, please. Next slide. Great. So some of you who've been following market analysis for a while probably are aware that IRC has a long history of developing and promoting market assessment tools and approaches, some well-known ones like EMMA and PCMA. The ultimate goal of doing these assessments is to design programming that supports local markets as much as possible. And our goal for market analysis is to gather the market-related information needed to design and support that kind of programming as efficiently as possible. So MARKit, and especially the revised edition of MARKit, is very much in line with that, focused on ensuring that the data that is collected is used. It's very user-friendly, and it's increasingly light touch. Generally, a couple advantages of market monitoring that we have kind of clued in on at IRC is that data is available faster than with these large-scale market assessments, and it's typically linked to ongoing programming. So there's a real opportunity to put that data to use in real time. It also can help staff develop a really good ongoing knowledge of local markets, since they're interacting with them frequently and regularly. So that's a real advantage because staff often feel empowered to use the data and to really understand the data. And there's also the opportunity to incorporate additional indicators besides price into your market monitoring. And potentially that can reduce the need for these heavier market assessments, which are often a bit of a barrier because they can be time and resource intensive. Next slide. So what have we done concretely to institutionalize MARKit at IRC? We've done three main things. So number one is just that MARKit is our go-to reference for anything market monitoring. So if a country program or a technical advisor asks about market monitoring, we steer them immediately towards MARKit. The second thing is that we've developed a market monitoring app to make data collection and analysis from market monitoring just easier for countries to adapt when they decide that they or adopt when they've decided that they're going to use it. And we've used MARKit principles to guide the development of that app. So for example, the default number of items in the app is 10 items. So MARKit, that's down from the 60 or 70 that many country programs previously used to follow the prices of. And the analysis is automated. So any country program that's interested in market monitoring is immediately oriented towards this app. And then we work with them to refine the list of items and the dashboards that come out of it. And then the third thing is that when COVID hit, there was a lot of heightened interest in market monitoring. So in collaboration with REACH and CRS, we developed a COVID-specific market monitoring data collection form where we incorporated some questions about the impact of COVID. So that was an example of how you can, in a targeted way, integrate some non-price data into your market monitoring. And we will keep that on hand and we'll adapt that for future crises. So that's a very quick overview of what we are doing broadly at IRC. For a specific look at one particular context, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Yannick.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm Yannick Benson. I'm the regional cash specialist for in IRC. I'm supporting East and West Africa. So as a MARKit certified trainer and from my regional position at IRC, I have a global view of the opportunity to use the MARKit toolkit in some of our program, which is why we are currently thinking on supporting the, for example, the Central African Republic, CAR, in the using of the MARKit toolkit. So we talk about the context in Central African Republic, CAR. So the violence in before and after the December 2020 presidential election in CAR has caused a paralysis of road freight transportation. So as a result, the capital Bangui and several provinces have been cut off from the main roads. So goods from Cameroon are blocked at the border, creating the disruption of supplies and a rise of food prices on the market. So weekly monitoring of market following the post-election crisis show a continuous increase in the price of imported and local product up to 100%. And yes, in the market, we see this increase in the market between late December 2020 and late January 2021. So the products most affected are rice, 100%, wheat flour, 97%, and meat, 64%. So the cost of the food basket increased due to the higher prices for meat, oil, sugar, and rice in early January 2021 compared to November 2020. So this disruption of supply chain has led us to think on the opportunity to set up a systematic and periodic market assessment in order to decide of the continuity of the CVA program in such a context. So next slide, please. So how we can use or how will MARKit help us in this case? So yes, after completing the MARKit TOT, we are working on how to get the market analysis and program response right in the design phase prior to implementation, because we think appropriate program design remains the most effective means to implement market responsive programs, and also to meet do no harm standards. So in this specific context, MARKit will also help us to track whether existing response positively or negatively distort local market in CAR. For example, surpassing the availability of supply increases prices for non-participants or causing inflation. Also, assess the continued and appropriateness of the chosen delivery modality, and determine whether the value and level of assistance remain adequate. So to achieve this, we need to well train our staffs on MARKit toolkit. But with COVID-19 pandemic, we need to design like remote training session. This lead us to find effective solution to few challenges, such as technical issue, especially related to electricity disruption and the poor internet network in CAR. The challenge in supervising supervising remotely the visit marketplace steps is a very important step in the MARKit toolkit, and also for the market price monitoring, because if you not done it properly, it can lead us to bias in our data collected data. So also think about access to some important market due to insecurity, and find an appropriate time to conduct training for our staff, because most of them are sometimes involved at the same time in our emergency programs and on different bases. So yes, that's I think for me, for my side, is all I can say about the implementing, the setting up of the MARKit toolkit. Thank you, and over to Marie-Sophie.
Ismail is there.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I had a short issue with my network. So I'm Marie-Sophie. I'm based in Maiduguri, Nigeria, and I will present you a CRS market-based program. Okay, so let's start with some contextual information about Northeast Nigeria. So we are currently in the 11th year of the armed conflict in Northeast Nigeria. More than 7.7 million people are in need in 3 states in Northeast Nigeria. We have a really limited humanitarian access. So humanitarian actors are provided assistance mostly in the main cities, but it's more complicated in deep field. We are also noticing high inflations. According to FuseNet, we currently have the highest annual inflation rate since April 2017. However, markets are still functioning in Northeast Nigeria, even despite the crisis. So I will talk a little bit about the market-based program that we have with CRS. So it's a multi-sectorial project, including food assistance, nutrition, and livelihood. Here we will focus on food assistance because this is the component with the market-based approach. The modality is the electronic vouchers that it's split in 3 wallets. The first one is for unconditional food. The second one is conditional to nutrient-rich food. And the last one is cash for transport. We are assisting over 90,000 people that are receiving monthly top-up. And we are doing this implementation with 2 local NGOs, GDPC and NAIF. So why do I call this project a market-based project? First, it's related to the objectives. We have 3 main objectives. The first one is to do coordination on price and market monitoring. So we are participating to an initiative from REACH and the Cash Working Group to coordinate the price and market monitoring. So all the red dots that you can see on the map are the markets that are monitored in Northeast Nigeria with the NGOs that are participating to these initiatives. Why are we doing market and price monitoring? This is to inform on the transfer value. So we are all following the food security sector recommendation to transfer the equivalent of 70% of the SMEB, so the Survival Minimum Expenditure Basket. So in this program, what CRS is doing? We are currently monitoring 6 markets, including participating vendors and non-participating vendors. We are focusing mainly on the SMEB items. The data collection is done on a weekly basis. And once we have the data, we are using automated dashboard to produce the result. Then at the coordination level, we are doing bi-weekly discussion with the food security sector to discuss the SMEB value and see if we need or not to increase or decrease the transfer value. The proper reporting is done on a monthly basis. Next slide, please. So since COVID-19, the market approach was really impacted and we needed to have some adaptive measures. So the first one was to disable biometric verifications to avoid spreading the virus. Then we also increased the number of vendors. The first goal was to have less beneficiaries per shop to avoid, again, spreading COVID-19. But it was also useful to increase the number of vendors and so increase the competition between vendors and limit the price increase. In terms of frequency of data collection, we switched from monthly to weekly monitoring because before COVID-19, the price volatility was low and it was not necessary to do more monitoring. In the tool, we also included some COVID-19 impact questions like government regulations or level of stock to see if vendors were impacted by the borders closure. In the analysis, we focus more on disaggregation per location because we saw that the impact was not the same in Maiduguri, in the main market, and in the deep field. At the coordination level, the food security sector created a task force to monitor the SMEB value and discuss adjustment of transfer value. And the main adaptative measure was to increase the transfer value 3 times in less than a year. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to show you some results from the price and market monitoring. So here you can see the SMEB value from March 2020 to February 2021 in Borno State. So we can see that a year ago, the SMEB value was 17,000 Naira, and less than a year after, it's more than the double. So doing price monitoring really helps us to adjust the transfer value, seeing that the SMEB value is not stable. Next slide, please. So another result, so this is an example from our automatic dashboard. So here we are using this graph to understand which commodities drive the increase of the SMEB value. So in Borno State, northeast Nigeria, we can see that beans, maize, and rice are the commodities that increase the most. Next slide, please. And the last example is the monthly reporting that we are doing. So you can see that we include graphs from the automatic dashboard, but also tables that are also from the dashboard. And you can see here, for instance, 4 different tables included the disaggregation of SMEB items. And it's for each locations where we are working to be sure that we are doing disaggregations analysis. Thank you for your attention, and back to Sonia.
Thank you, Emily, Yannick, and Marie-Sophie for your presentations and insights. We have had a number of questions that have been shared in the chat, and we'll turn to those now. So our first question is for Megan and Kasum. And the question is, we've seen examples on the use of MARKit in West Africa. We've also seen examples of the use of MARKit for staple food monitoring. Can you give the participants a sense of the countries and also the commodities or products for which MARKit has been used for monitoring globally?
Sure, I can answer that. And just to give a pretty general response, within CRS programs, we've used MARKit. I can't say exactly the number of programs, but in Central America, we have several programs. In West Africa and Central Africa, as presented by Marie-Sophie, we've used it in countries in the Middle East region and in Asia. So really, we've been pushing it out across programs. I'll say that most of these programs do focus on food commodities, since MARKit is really the most useful when you're doing multiple transfers over time. So monthly food transfers or cash or voucher transfers. But we have used in Syria, I can say, we've also used MARKit to monitor prices of non-food items, including winter clothes, mattresses, and some other NFIs that we were distributing on a fairly regular basis for displaced populations. So those are just a few examples. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Megan. Our next question is for Emily, and it regards the institutionalization of MARKit for market monitoring. So how exactly have you worked to get organizational buy-in, and what were some of the blockers or enablers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we definitely have not figured it out. I wish we had institutionalized it perfectly across all countries, but we have not. I think there's always a bit of a tension between what we do at HQ and what we prioritize at HQ and what we prioritize and what we can realistically do in country programs. But I think at the headquarters level, we have advanced market analysis fairly successfully at the headquarters level. Partly through our sort of learning and like resources initiatives. We've made a bit of a name for ourselves. We've invested a lot of years in projects focused on developing these tools and resources. We also have a cash strategy at the headquarters level. So we've prioritized cash assistance as something that we want to increase throughout the organization. And linked to this, we have a number of initiatives to help, promote the uptake of these priorities at the country level. So for example, we have a set of standards that are sort of minimum standards for good program quality that cover our organizational priorities. So for cash, there were things related to M&E, including market monitoring. At the country program level, again, it's a bit different. So these headquarters initiatives do trickle down and influence what happens to an extent. But I would say, in my experience, from my observations, country programs tend to pick up market monitoring when it's a donor requirement, where there's a strong coordinated effort to do market monitoring in country. So they're sort of setting this expectation that different organizations will contribute, and they feel like they have to, meet the standard. So I think what we can do is kind of a bit of both. So having accessible tools and sort of the gentle nudging from the headquarters level can definitely help. It can help make country programs more receptive to the idea of doing market monitoring and more comfortable engaging in ongoing initiatives in country. And the last thing I'll say is that COVID was a bit of a motivator. So we definitely saw an increased interest in market monitoring when COVID hit, just because there was this perception that markets would cease to function when border closures hit. So there was a bit of an uptick when COVID hit. So we capitalized on that to the extent that we could. The final thing I will say is that MARKit is a really great entry point, I think, for getting some buy-in, again, because it tends to be more staff-led, accessible, and the implications of the data that's being gathered are really clear. So I think MARKit has really great potential to help increase uptake.
Thanks so much, Emily. So our next question is for Emily, Yannick, and Marie-Sophie. And the question is, do the various humanitarian and development organizations or even donors share the raw data with each other and local governments or other interested parties? And what is the level of collaboration required to share the workload a bit and to monitor more markets, goods, and services? So this has to do with kind of the coordination on data collection and then also the coordination on dissemination of the data. So I'm not sure, perhaps Marie-Sophie or Yannick, would either of you like to take that question?
Yes, sure. I can probably provide a first answer. So in Nigeria, at the beginning, we were sharing only the SMEB value, but not the raw data. And now we are working with the cash working group and Reach to do data collection all together with the same tool and within the same time frame. And we are also able to have access to the raw data of all organizations after it's anonymized, obviously.
Great, thank you, Marie-Sophie. I'm not sure if Yannick, if you have any insights from your experiences in the countries that you cover. Over.
Okay, thank you. No, I think I don't have much to add. I think, as Marie-Sophie just said, is pretty same, is the same approaches in some of the country that I cover. Is the you have the MAB, you have to check with also with reach, and yeah, maybe they can help sometime to data collecting, and we work together with them to have some raw data, and yeah, I think it's the same. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Yannick. So we're approaching the end of our 75-minute webinar, and our final question is for Megan. And the question is whether the analysis on MARKit integration in the tool provides a specific integration value. So maybe if you could talk a little bit more about the integration analysis in the Excel and then eventual Power BI tool.
Yeah, no, currently the database is not set up to provide a integration model, but we do have a worksheet that is attached to the MARKit manual, which does outline how you can do a quantitative analysis of MARKit integration between your markets if you have historical price data. So we provide some guidance on how we do this. In most cases, we really focus on more of a qualitative understanding of how markets relate to one another, just to make it a little bit more accessible and for programs in which secondary and historical data is not available for the markets where we work. But we do provide, again, guidance on how someone might do this in Excel using historical data. And that is something that we can consider moving forward. So great question. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Megan. So I think we might have time for, well, actually, no. I think that with that, thank you so much for those insights. So I'd like to thank the presenters and to those of you calling in for your participation in today's webinar on the second edition of the MARKit Toolkit and its applications for decision making. Please be sure to look out for future MARKit training opportunities and webinars, and do not hesitate to reach out to our presenters today for additional insights on how to use this toolkit to meet your organization's MARKit monitoring needs. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you all, and we look forward to engaging with you again soon.